The scientific revolution starts now.
This is the First Joy Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
How did you end up at the Office of Naval Research?
Oh, by the way, I don't see a button that you're recording. You should record this.
Yeah, we're going. We're going. We record locally.
Okay. It's for posterity's sake. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, I told you, hubris galore. That's the only thing I got going. They keep on rejecting my papers, so nobody can read my paper. Oh, by the way, do me a huge favor. This Superforce paper, the revised one, it's called Superforce, all caps. The fundamental force of unification. Send that to all your subscribers, please. This is my one. I implore you to do it because it seems to me this is the only way I'll ever get read.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the description for sure. And I definitely want to discuss that paper at some point very soon. But
especially equation 1, because it talks to something that you would love. The idea. How can it apply to the Planck scale as well as the observable universe, the horizon scale?
Yeah, we have a lot of thoughts about that. We definitely want to unpack this with the luxury of depth. But we really want to get a sense first. We want to do a couple of things. So we want to get a sense of the questions that drove you to this point where you were actually even working on these problems, a little bit about really just who you are and what brought you to that. And then we want to have you unpack this idea. And then we'll start to tell you some of our thoughts about it and we can get a conversation going. But it'd be great to just start off by getting to know you a little better.
All right. I can start with origins. There's nothing better than origins. So let's start. I was born in Romania. I came here. I left there when I was about 13 years of age. Now that part of the world has had a lot of political issues. And because, put it this way, Romania, if you just unpack the word, it means Romania, nation of Rome. It actually came about as the fusion of the great Dacians, which Herodotus called the bravest of the Thracians, and the Roman legions of the great Emperor Trajan. Now, some people may disagree whether the Romans were great or not, but from a military conquest point of view, why do you think they actually raised the column, Trajan's column, in the middle of Rome? That war was horrific. It was 2 campaigns, 101, 102, 105, 106. I believe this was CE, so Common Era.
Well, we still use their language in our law and in our medicine and in our buildings. Our state buildings still look basically Roman. I mean, I think it's hard for somebody to argue that they weren't dominant. Foundational. Yeah.
Exactly. So let's not take away from Rome what is Rome's. But so the Dacians and the Romans fought it over. Unfortunately, the Dacians, which were under the lead of a great king, Decebalus in Roman and Latin, in Romanian it's called Decebal. He was the one that he actually fell on his sword. He refused to be taken prisoner. So that should tell you something about the spirit of fight in the Romanian people. I still believe it's there. I still believe every one of us has us. So trăiască poporul român, trăiască România.
Yeah, and even in modern times, it seems like they had a strong resistance movement during the Second World War as well. And they've, of course, been, then the Soviets tried to move in and take them over, and they've just been really attacked people over the course of modern history even.
Over and over. It's a very misunderstood country, and it has made political mistakes, and as a result, it failed horribly at the end of WW2. But don't take that against the Romanian people. That's the government. It's all nonsense, politics. But anyway.
And so when were you born there?
I was born, put it this way, I'm about 55.
Okay.
Give or take. Anyway. my daughter, I have a 11-year-old daughter. She keeps on saying, "Daddy, if you dyed your hair, they couldn't tell your age." Because I still, I every now and then I still get zits, for God's sake. Can you believe that at my age? But anyway, so yeah, I have let's just say a fat face. So, it's filled with grease. Anyway, maybe it's because I don't actually eat the best stuff. I should be take care. But anyway, let's go back to origin. So I came here when I was 13 years of age, about 13, and those were the times of the great Ronald Reagan. Reagan was beloved.
How did you come here?
By the Romanian people. I came here through a unification of family. The person that my mother was married to came here through Turkey. He immigrated, and after a while, he was able to actually get his citizenship and bring us over. So I came as an alien resident. It took me a long time to get my citizenship. So I treasure. I'm a naturalized citizen. I wish, though, I was born here in some way. But anyway, put it this way: I'm American apple pie made in Romania. That's the way I look at myself. I love this land, but I also love the land of my origin. I think you should never forget where you come from. And the idea of talking bad about your nation, either the one that you come to or the one that you have left, it's not a good thing. It doesn't show the greatest of character. But anyway.
But were you already thinking about science when you were in Romania, when you were a little kid? Were you always interested in how nature worked, or was that something that started later?
Yes, I absolutely loved it. But I loved it for I just wanted to question my teachers all the time. They were so pedagogical, just like mainstream physics nowadays, the high priesthood of physics. I mean, I respected them, and I respect the physics community greatly. I just wish they would be more tolerant of new ideas. A friend of mine, I have some peeps back in New York City that watch, statistically speaking, what podcast I'm on, what my Wikipedia page says, and so forth. A friend of mine called me, as a matter of fact, 2 days ago, said, they just changed your Wikipedia page. Now they added the word pseudoscience to describe your work. So it's not bad enough that it's called scam. It's called disinformation. Now they added pseudoscience.
Well, I would actually go so far as to say that this is, if you're climbing a ladder, going from scam to disinformation to pseudoscience might actually be motion in the right direction. Because that's only
they fused all three. Now it's a scam followed by pseudoscience followed by disinformation. Oh, thank you.
So were you interested immediately in physics? Were you interested in mathematics? What was what?
Oh, math! I loved mathematics, but it started to dawn on me that physics and that mathematics is more of a tool. That physics is more of a description of nature, and the way you interpret physics should not be necessarily mathematically based. The whole idea that this highly complex and abstract notation, for goodness sake, it takes years to just understand Dirac notation, for example, the bracket thing, among other things. For example, why don't you write the Dirac equation the way it's meant to be, the combination of quantum mechanics and special relativity, such a beautiful equation, but written in Dirac notation, it sucks. It absolutely says nothing to me. Maybe someone that studied the notation for years has something to say about it. Why don't you actually write it out in what I call Einsteinian mathematics? I've never, until the Einstein general theory of relativity and the way he described his field equations, he dealt with very simple notation. That's why I love Einsteinian mathematics. It's not, look, abstract and complex mathematical acrobatics should not pass for great physics. Unfortunately, ER equal EPR, hence ADS equals CFT. For goodness sake, we live in a de Sitter space, not an anti-de Sitter space to start with, as Eric Valindes pointed out. But anyway, so yes, I have certain things that I don't agree with mainstream physics, but I just wish they were more tolerant of other ideas.
But this must
I'm
have
not
come.
saying
This must have come like
but
pretty
it's
late,
tolerant.
right? So you're a kid in Romania. You have these teachers that are really pedagogical, and you start to realize that but you love math. And so
Yes.
when do you start to move towards applying your love of math to making new equations? Because most people,
Well, it seems like you got into engineering at some point, right? In the United States? Yeah.
F equal M dV dt. That's what started it all for me. F equal ma. Second law of motion by Isaac Newton. Even though the true derivation comes out of Euler, that's really Euler's formula. The sum of forces equal ddt of mv. The whole idea of the linear momentum, that time differential is the sum of forces, external. But that's Euler's equation. From that, you can derive F equal ma or m dv dt, unless, of course, your mass changes, hence the rocket equation. By the way, I should say this now before I get in trouble eventually for not saying
Oh yeah, we forgot to do the disclaimer.
I come on this podcast as a private citizen, and my ideas are my own and not necessarily those of the United States Navy or the United States Space Force. So now that I've said it, I got that out of the way. Thank you. Go on. Ask anything you want.
Yeah, I want to still try to understand how you got into studying these things. So, I mean, I also want to understand how you got into engineering. So what was your path once you got to the United States to becoming an engineer? Why didn't you go into theoretical physics? And what dragged you into engineering?
My uncle. My uncle in Romania was in the Office of Patents and Trademarks. And some of the best, I mean, the best of the best engineering-wise were selected for that office. It was a great honor to be accepted. A patent examiner, let's say, Einstein spent some time, right? Wasn't it 1905, Anno Mirabilis, the 5 papers? He actually wrote them and published them in the Annalen der Physik in while being a patent examiner. Mm-hmm. Was it in Switzerland? I believe so. But anyway, so I idolized my uncle, and I wanted to follow in his footsteps. He was an unbelievable engineer.
Pardon the interruption, but we need to ask a favor. If you've been watching the podcast and you are enjoying the conversations that we bring out into the world, consider coming over to patreon.com/demystifysci and donating a couple dollars a month to the podcast. In return, you get each episode early. You get it on Saturdays instead of having to wait for Monday and Thursdays. And you also get to join our Patreon community, which gathers every Sunday on Zoom, where we have people talking about the big questions that they have about the world, sharing stories about their experiences with life and science, and we generally just investigate closely the topics that are most interesting to our growing community. If you can't donate, that's totally fine. You can join our Facebook, you can join our Discord, you can join our YouTube channel by subscribing to it, you can leave a comment, you can tell a friend about the podcast. Any little bit that you can do to help spread the word about Demystify Sci is super, super valuable to us, and we hope that you will do so.
This man, I mean, he did. I remember one time he actually proved one of Euclid's elements, one of the proofs in Euclid elements. He proved it in like three steps. I was just flabbergasted.
What kind of an engineer was he?
He was a fluid and thermal sciences engineer. He worked a lot with oil pipes, oil rigs, and other things, hydraulics.
Gotcha.
He was quite, yeah. But I enhanced. That's why my Bachelor of Science is in the engineering of fluid and thermal sciences. I really wanted to follow in his footsteps. He meant a great deal to me, and a great man. His name was Eugene. Anyway.
So what topics grabbed a hold of you during your early engineering days? I
liked following a lot of. I went to a lot of courses in physics. For example, I followed some courses in quantum mechanics, one in condensed matter physics. That's how I learned about superconductivity. And I read a lot on my own. I admire, there was this great book I came upon later in my, how should I say, my education. Because one should never stop getting educated. But it was by Carver Mead, Collective Electrodynamics. I call it the Little Green Book. I don't know if you refer, but anyway.
Yeah, we know Carver very well. We've had him on the show twice, and we've met him in person. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and his ideas are very compelling
Incredible
too.
engineer.
And he, of course, worked with Feynman, and he just has incredible wealth of wisdom and experience to bring to.
One of the gods of the semiconductor technology. I mean, truly a great mind. And yeah, that little book, just an amazing book. One of my favorite. It's I don't think more than 100 pages, something of that nature. I call it the Little Green Book because it's little. So but a lot of good engineering as well as foundational physics. He speaks, yes, he describes the terms mathematically, but I understood them from a physics point of view first. He has that ability. He has the ability to, he's another man that I idolize, Carver Mead. He's great mind. Getting up in years though.
The most amazing insight that he really brought to me was that he seemed to recognize that light involved two atoms at all times. And he kind of resurrected the liner notes from G.N. Lewis, who made some comment to this effect. But it always struck me as strange when I was learning optics and so forth that light was just treated as this little cannonball that's shot off into nowhere of some mysterious energy. And Carver did a really good job of understanding that it's a conversation between atoms. And I found that to be, for me personally, that was the most mind-bending revelation from that work.
Speaking of the photon, have you ever thought, what if I'm not saying that Freeman Dyson, for example, the great Freeman Dyson, did not believe gravitons exist. But anyway, say that there is some not necessarily a particle. I believe in fields, number one, and fluctuations in fields. I believe in vibrations, oscillations in fields that sometimes are collective and collectively vibrate. But anyway, from a space-time point of view, have you ever thought the graviton is considered what? A spin 2 particle? The photon is a spin 1. What if the graviton is really made out of light? I mean, the whole idea that space-time somehow is a collective of light, somehow out of phase.
Yeah, I think gravity and light definitely point to two sides of a similar operation. Even these gravitational waves, whether you're a fan of them or you're buying this data or not, I mean, the transverse nature of gravitational waves, the fact that it falls off with an inverse square, the same as light, this ray-like connectivity nature of gravity, it's all very much pointing at two sides of the same coin to me. It is very intriguing.
And I'm a great fan of GWs. As a matter of fact, one of my patents is on high-frequency gravitational waves. So I definitely believe that that space-time itself can actually fluctuate. Actually, from now to bring the so-called Pais effect into play, you could describe it, in my opinion, as really the extremely high energy densities that are generated by accelerated vibration of a non-equilibrium plasma. And by non-equilibrium, I mean where the electrons are not necessarily in a Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution. Hence, for example, it's called a cold plasma.
So before we get it, hold on. I think that understanding people's mathematics is best done by following the path by which they arrive at the math. Because otherwise, you have a complete vision of the way that all these things fit together, but without us being able to follow your thought process, it makes it very, very difficult to just accept the equations on face value. And so we've gotten as far as the fact that you are studying engineering in undergrad. Where'd you go for undergrad?
Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And everybody asked me, is that a military school? You know, the reserve word. And then, no. It actually came about from Case School of Engineering uniting with, I believe it was, what's the other one? Western Reserve College. At the time, Case School of Engineering were all boys and Western Reserve were all girls. So they fused the two together and hence a university. And
okay. So you're in university, you're studying engineering. Did you find Carver's work while you were in school?
No, I found it a little later, maybe in my, let's say while I was working at Cisco and Hennessy. I worked in a company in New York City. That was my first job. It was electronic systems and so forth. And I remember I saw the book on, I had a mentor there. So someone was very technically apt, and I saw it in his office. And I said, "Can I borrow this?" You know, because the title struck me amazing. Collective electrodynamics, the quantum foundation of classical electromagnetism. I mean, whoa, you're right there. Because really, our reality is quantum in nature, and yet we see everything from a macroscopic perspective. But what if there were such things as macroscopic quantum phenomena? The whole idea of superconductivity being one such thing. The idea that you could treat it both classically and quantum mechanically.
And so you were working at this firm and you started to get interested in Carver's perspective on the quantum world, but there's still this, a lot of people get interested in it. A lot of people, you know, they read the pop science, they read the magazines, they read the books, maybe they even dabble and they read the papers. And so they're keeping up with the cutting edge of the field. But there's something that must have happened where you went from working in the private sector to moving to the military and then starting to actually parameterize these ideas in context of scientific papers. And so what's that arc look like?
Love of my life, propulsion. And especially what some people call alternative propulsion. Not the idea that you throw something outside the back of the nozzle, all of a sudden the rocket goes forward. And again, Newton's third law of motion, action, reaction. No, I wanted to know if there's another way to propel objects through space-time. Space at the time, but that space-time came later once I actually read through Einstein's great work. Actually, my first introduction from Einstein didn't come from one of his works directly, but a little book written by Schrödinger called Space-Time Structure, in which he describes GR amazingly well with equations I could actually understand. But the physics is superb. I truly recommend that book, Space-Time Structure, by, of course, the great Schrödinger, Erwin Schrödinger. He had an interesting life. At one point, I remember reading that he was in some hotel. When he came up with Schrödinger's equation, he was cooped up in some hotel with both his wife and his mistress. Interesting man. I mean, maybe that's how you get great ideas.
The escapism of physics rears its head.
Well put. Nastya. Is it okay if I call you Nastya?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Shiloh, Nastya. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So Schrödinger has a book, Space-Time Structure, and you start to think about propulsion. But something about propulsion is that, as far as I understand, the arc by which we got to our modern propulsion systems is that people started with the idea that if you put something in a confined space and put a nozzle on that, then you get force. There's this iterative aspect to the development. I don't think that it was a mathematics first approach to doing it, right? So there's this constant interplay between engineering and mathematics and theoretical physics where we get the final product of the process not necessarily by starting with a theoretical understanding of what we will one day build. We're basically still monkeys bashing rocks against each other until we get sparks that fly, and then we take that spark and we nurture it until it comes into something bigger and bigger. And the last stage is optimization through theoretical construction, because you have a system that kind of works, but it's pretty shitty, and then you start to work on it, and then you get something that really, really works. And so your approach here sounds like it's really theoretical first.
Yes.
And that's kind of unusual.
Whether there's a now way to propel. The whole idea, for example, I kept on questioning, what if there's, the whole idea of Schwinger limit, that if you can get extremely high energy densities at one point in space-time, and you locally build and build and build, put more and more energy into that little point, let's call it, in space-time, you'll eventually get a black hole. What is a black hole really? What if it's a hole you actually create in space-time itself, but allows you to actually go through some? So the way I saw it is, what if we can alter the medium around us so that all of a sudden we no longer have to go from point A to point C by actually going through point B, but actually somehow get from point A to point C like a jump? What if we could actually put a hole in space-time?
I think that Carl Sagan proposed that with wormholes in Cosmos, right? When he wrote it in the 70s or 80s.
Well, in his fiction work, right? Wasn't it what is it called?
Well,
Contact?
Contact. He got some guy who was at Caltech to do the calculations for what it could look like. And then on the basis...
Kip Thorne, the great Kip Thorne,
yeah,
actually won the Nobel Prize for gravitational waves.
And so was your inspiration partially Kip Thorne, or was it distinct?
I wish Kip Thorne would have answered my many emails. I love the man. He's another one of my idols. I actually used some of his lecture notes in one of my papers that discusses this thing called the hybrid aerospace undersea craft. Some people call it a craft using an inertial mass reduction device, but it truly is. Look, the whole idea is this: what's the Schwinger limit?
I don't actually know. Let's unpack that. What is that?
Well, before we get to that, maybe can I just ask you? You've referred to space-time as a medium, and I'm curious why you think that it's appropriate to treat space-time as a medium.
He's not going to let you get away with that.
That's
because, like, traditionally when I think about a medium, I think about a material substrate upon which some activity plays out. And, obviously space is an idea, it's not a material body. And time is also an idea, it's a relational concept, and it's also not a material body. So I'm very skeptical of treating an idea as a medium, because mediums are material and ideas are, of course, relational. So I'm curious why you prefer that.
You make a lot of sense, but follow the work of Frank Wilczek. He himself believes in the material. I can never say that right. Space-time being material of some sort. It could be, for example, the Professor Kirsten Wang of MIT, formerly of MIT. He is deceased. He actually wrote a book called Our Superfluid Universe. Again, the whole idea is that the so-called quantum vacuum, what we understand as the very quantum basics of our space-time continuum, let's call it that, is a material of sorts. Now, I'm not saying it necessarily has a crystal structure, but I believe there is space-time geometric curvature linked to it locally. I believe, actually, that Superforce paper that we eventually will discuss, if you look carefully, you can actually reformulate Einstein's gravitational field equation to basically say it's the superforce acting locally on the space-time geometric structure that gives rise to energy density, hence matter. That's maybe another way, again, a new perspective on old physics. We don't need to have new physics here. Everybody's always looking for new physics. What if there are new perspectives on old physics? There's nothing wrong with seeing things differently and yet getting something completely revolutionary.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely useful as a framework like this. I think space-time as a concept, especially in dynamical systems, is extremely useful. It's just that if you are pointing at the motion of some materials and you don't really pay attention to those materials, then you have the potential of reifying that idea of space-time into an actor itself, when in reality it's describing the motion of some other actors, and you kind of just subvert the investigation at that point.
Well, because math has this incredible property of being possible to disconnect from reality. You can have math that has no bearing on any physical bodies whatsoever. And so if we're talking about the mathematics of space-time and we're talking about any kind of quantum math or relativistic math, then the foundation must be, how does the math relate to what is happening on the physical level? Because
at the material world.
At the material world, because, and I say this is really important, because if we do not take the metaphysical basis of reality to be bodies, then we by necessity have to live in a simulation universe. If the only thing that's at the bottom is math, if there's no body that's moving, if there's no thing that's down there, then there's no alternative to this being a computer simulation. And I don't think that people really want to go down that road.
Some people do.
I wouldn't. I do not think we live in a simulation. As beautifully mathematical as that could be described, again, abstract, complex mathematical gymnastics should not pass for great physics. Period.
And so the relativistic Einsteinian perspective on space-time is mathematically functional because it is predictive and accurate. But do you have a sense to what is the physical structure that it's pointing to? Because you talked about the quantum fields. Do you think that it's pointing at the quantum fields? Do you think that it's pointing at the gravitational fields? Like, what is the substance of space-time?
My belief is that we're dealing with some sort of geometric structure within a superfluid-like field. But it's not just a homogeneous field. It could be a field of fields. And I believe possibly it's because of the differing space-time geometric structure at every point in space-time that we get different forms of matter. So in other words, somehow it's as if there's a grid-like entity that's also superfluid in nature, that has a material quality to it. See what Frank Wilczek has to say about the materiality of the quantum vacuum.
Can we define superfluid? Can we define superfluid? I don't totally know. I don't have a picture in my brain.
A fluid, for example, a fluid could be either a gas or liquid. So something that moves, either incompressible or compressible. A superfluid is something that is beyond what we understand as a fluid. For example, it's quote-unquote hydrodynamics defy our instinctual understanding of what a fluid is.
I've seen videos of. I've seen
superfluid. It would actually come out of the container.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've seen videos of superfluid hydrogen, which it's sitting in.
Is it hydrogen or helium? I think it might be helium.
It might be helium, but it's inside of this container and it's just crawling up the walls and behaving in this kind of, almost anti-gravity sort of way.
Well, gravity is really weak.
This way. An electrically charged superfluid is a superconductor. Think of it that way. Now, I remember watching a podcast where you were questioning what an electrical charge is, and I think that's such an incredibly important question. Before we start playing around with all this abstract, complex mathematical gymnastics. What is an electron? What is a proton? What exactly is the electric charge?
Yes.
I remember reading somewhere that Theodore Kaluza, the whole idea of the fifth dimension, that electric charge may actually be motion in this so-called fifth dimension. But what is it truly? I think we have to address these physically and understand fundamentally what these mean before bringing mathematics into the picture. Again, mathematics should be used as a tool to understand or better penetrate this fog of physics.
Yeah, and like to just straight up answer your question, I think that we have to think of charge. We have to go back and look at the original experiments and recognize that charge is defined by some motion of the atom itself. The atom is making charge. It's making that's an quality of the atom, right? And we have to back this up a long ways and start actually thinking about the structure of the atom in order to make sense of these phenomena. But that doesn't seem to be a huge concern for. It's not necessarily an engineering concern even, really, unless you want to break through the so-called laws of physics.
Yeah, that's exactly I think that's a really valuable point, because I think that the model for the applicability of engineering that I have is that you begin with something that is apparent and you start to mess with it, and then you only really need to change your conception of how it works when you sit at the very, very edge of your ability.
At the limit of your ability.
Yeah, exactly. And so as long as you're at the limit of your ability, then you have to start to be thinking about, okay, well, what does this actually mean in terms of physical objects? Because I think that, like, look, if you have a mathematical equation and you recognize off of the equation that, let's say, you have to put a ton of energy into some point in space in order to get some kind of effect. In order to be able to build a thing that can direct that much energy into a specific point, you have to understand something fundamental about what energy is, how you can generate such massive quantities, and how you can focus it. That can't come from just this iterative, accidental, maybe we'll stumble into it. I
think like the nuclear bomb is a great example, or just nuclear energy in general, because before that, we had the basic thermodynamic systems, all these combustion systems, essentially, and that was how you get that kind of explosive power. But then you have to reconceive of these actual chemicals as having nuclear architecture, which is responsible for a lot more energy. And so you have to make this huge paradigm shift where you start thinking about atoms instead of chemicals.
And so it's interesting to think about this as being on the edge of shifting. It's the same, if you permit me the analogy, it's the same kind of transition as from combustion to nuclear physics, where you go from it's
chemical energy usage to nuclear energy.
Yeah.
It's like you back up in scale. Yeah, like you're going down in scale at some sense. It's like if we're going to be able to manipulate gravity, we probably have to understand a finer grain scale of what's happening. And I think that's what these efforts at quantizing space-time and so forth are geared at, is trying to understand the next scale level interactions.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Advances in engineering can only come from understanding the fundamental physics. You have to understand foundationally physics at its lowest, at the smallest scale possible. Now we hold it as the Planck scale, but the Superforce speaks to something even smaller, possibly on the order of 10 to the minus 54 meters, which is really the proton acting as a black hole, which is really the work of someone called Nassim Haramein, that unfortunately mainstream physics has always also try to sometimes I get lost for words, so I'd appreciate a little help when I do.
Hold on, are you friends with Nassim? Because we've been trying to talk to Nassim.
No. I wish I was.
Okay.
I wish that I reached out with to him, but there was no reaching back. But
yeah, same here.
He'd read that paper. I'd wish that he would read that 3-page Superforce paper. So don't forget to send that out, please.
Yeah, we'll put it in the description everybody who's listening right now can just go down in the description and pull it up.
Great. Thank you very much for that, by the way. And send it to Carver Mead too, please. I would like to hear Professor Mead's take on it. I really would.
Yeah,
Who
of
knows?
course.
Maybe one day you'll get him and I together, and I hold the man in such great esteem, and he has some unbelievable ideas. But again, they will not listen to him because he, quote unquote, is not of the correct pedigree. Why? Because the man has an electrical engineering degree. He's not supposed to be a quantum physicist, hence what he has to say about that particular idea, for example, even gravitation and its quantum foundations, it's irrelevant. How can you be so intolerant? How? How is science, how is physics supposed to advance?
Well, yeah, I mean, you always, the horrible thing about science, of course, is that you just get people's careers and the human side gets involved, of course. It's not, I mean, particularly since World War II, it's just been, it's a really industrial operation. It's geared towards careers and product development in a way that if we were all just wealthy barons with tons of free time, we wouldn't be, you know, but I don't think we're going back to that anytime. So, you know, our best shot is just to do this work outside of the academy if it doesn't fit into the academy and, you know, do the best that we can. But I want to go back to these like fundamental physical constants a little bit, because I think there's some problems there, particularly with Planck's derivation of the universalization of black body radiation. And for me, it's like if those aren't really physical constants, if they're variable depending on the material, then we're not going to be able to subdivide material like based on these limits anymore. Do you have any
work, Pierre-Marie Robitaille?
Yeah, Pierre's a good friend of ours. And I think he has made a really good case for the invalidity of Kirchhoff's laws with respect to universalizing black body radiation. I mean, you just quite frankly cannot reproduce Kirchhoff's law with perfectly reflective bodies. You get an undefined component of the equation. And, you know, I went back and looked at Planck's derivation of the universalization, which he uses to solve this ultraviolet catastrophe and so forth. But, you know, he does some kind of like squidgy things. Like, first of all, he does assume that these black body properties are universal to all materials, which no one's ever shown in a laboratory. That doesn't really make sense.
Well, in his derivation for it, he has to add a particle of carbon soot inside the reflective container to make it functional.
Yeah, and then he also uses polarized light for his proofs too. And we know that you know, black body spectra are never polarized. It's just it's a very, very thinly grounded. It's not grounded in empirical science. This idea that this radiation is universal in this sense. And if that's not the case, then you have a different Planck's constant for each type of material that depends on its emissivity and absorptivity. And you get into a place where this isn't anything more fundamental than any scaling factor in an equation. And that's a bit troubling. I mean, it also pokes holes in the constancy of Boltzmann's. If you look at thermal processes, black body radiation, and in thermal processes, you can't both have a real temperature and a constant, Boltzmann's constant. You can have an effective temperature that varies depending on the lattice components of the material, but you don't really have, at that point, then you can keep your constant. But otherwise, these don't seem to be fundamental to me, although they're treated that way.
My issue, or rather, the way a mainstream physicist would address this, you would say, but experiment proves Kirchhoff's law to be correct.
But that's just not true, right? I mean, no one has ever taken a reflecting cavity and generated thermal radiation from it in a black body. But lasers are proof of that. I mean, and no one has ever taken a gas and made a black body spectrum out of it, no matter how much pressure they put it under. They can widen some of the bands, but it doesn't look anything like a black body curve. And so,
but how do you bring them to the table and make them start looking at, because so many papers have been written based on Kirchhoff's law. Could you imagine what this would do to astrophysics, for example?
Well, even more based on Planck's interpretation of Kirchhoff's law and sort of his championing of this universalization idea. But nobody's going back and doing those fundamental experiments because they'd fail. There's no way for them to actually demonstrate that it's universal. This is just patently false. But all of the theory, All of Planck's work is based on that. And I'm not saying those relationships don't hold up for black bodies. They certainly do for perfect black bodies. And it's a very useful relationship. And like this, there's something to be learned from the quantization, which he originally, by the way, called the quanta of action. So there's something about the discrete motions of the atom that are important in light. Right. So that's important, but it being this basic kernel, I think is a bit misleading, because I don't think it's that simple. I think it depends on the material.
Right. I wish I knew or understood more on the subject, but I think they should take another look at Dr. Robitaille's work, most definitely. Again, his work has been called pseudoscience. This is how you dismiss people.
Of course.
You call it pseudoscience, disinformation, misinformation, scam. And all of a sudden, mainstream physicists will not touch you with a 30-foot pole.
Well, I think that the question here is, how do you reconcile beginning with Planck's constant in your own work if there is reason to believe that the universality of it doesn't hold?
Look at the Superforce. It doesn't have Planck's constant in it.
It seems like it's derived from Planck's from a Planckian relationship, though.
That's just 100%. But isn't it interesting how Planck's constant falls out? So you could say the Superforce speaks to both quantum mechanics and classical mechanics because it does not have H in it. It's the one bridge that can bring it all together. And if you look carefully at equation 1 in the Superforce paper, it is incredibly important to realize that the Superforce exists both at the Planck scale and at the observable universal scale, but it goes beyond. I believe that this equation, for example, if we eventually find out that the universe, say, it's not 10 to the 26 meters, the observable universe, but it's 10 to the 80 meters or something of that nature, that equation can predict how much mass is in it. How can it do that? Unless there is a space-time geometric structure to this whole thing. There is a grid covered in this superfluid. Now, who put that grid there? Don't ask me. Well,
the atoms did, as far as I can tell.
Go that way.
All right, so let's.
Superforce speaks also to a super bang, which speaks to superintelligence. I call it the triarchy of creation. I really do believe that the universe is conscious. I believe that there is a superintelligence that controls everything.
Have you seen the work of Donald Hoffman by any chance?
I have heard of it. I have seen one podcast. He's, again, highly mathematical.
He is, but his idea of like the conscious agents summing up to unique, more complex and novel conscious agents is really intriguing. You know, that by putting two people in a room, you don't just get the sum of their two consciousness, you get something else out of it. It's kind of something like that. And then if you scale that up,
the whole idea of collective electrodynamics, you get something totally different. The whole idea of what Phil Anderson used to call emergence in condensed matter physics. It looks nothing like what you put together, or rather what's come from. When you fuse these things collectively, you get emergent properties.
So what is that?
Thing.
Can we unpack like what you imagine to be the utility of reducing all of these forces down to one? What is the value and technological or just explanatory? Maybe let's not go into the explanatory power, but the technological value of that conception.
Because I believe that if you can even nudge the Superforce, whole horizons in advanced engineering and technologies open up. If you can just nudge it.
And how would you do that?
Look at its structure. Look at how simple its mathematical structure is. C, speed of light, to the 4th power, divided by what? Big G. So on top, you really have a driving factor divided by the denominator is what? A retarding factor. Is that gravitation that tries to stem your advance. But what makes it incredibly important is that speed of light. Light. And what's light? It can be based on the magnetic permeability of free space and the electrical permittivity of free space. One of the greatest advances that, in my opinion, all the incredible mathematics of James Clerk Maxwell really came down to C squared equals 1 divided by mu naught epsilon naught, which is really what? The electrical permittivity of free space times the magnetic permeability of free space.
And in the sense of the medium that we were talking about, that sounds like the deformability of that medium to me from an elastic mechanics standpoint.
Again, exactly. So there's a material structure to space-time, both on a macroscopic and microscopic scale.
Yeah, well, I mean, there has to be. It's just not physics otherwise, as far as I'm concerned. I just don't know that you can actually make sense of something physically without having actors.
What is the significance of the speed of light to the fourth power?
First of all, it's a nonlinear term, which means energy amplification. Whenever you have nonlinearities of that nature, and also the speed of light is huge. It's what? It's 10 to the, it's on the order of 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. 10 to the 8 to the 4th is what? On the order of what? Like 10 to the 32, but don't forget the little number next to it. So it makes it like on the order of 10 to the 34. And your G, your big G, it's on the order of 10 to the minus 10. So it acts as an amplifier. So that comes up and it's 10 to the 44 newtons. That's the superforce. It's on the order of 10 to the 44 newtons. No, that's how powerful this force is.
Mathematically, I understand, but I'm trying to understand what the physical basis is behind the equation. So why would you raise the speed of light to the 4th power? What does that give you physically? What is it physically representing when you do that?
It comes out of the gravitational field of equations of Einstein. It's not something that Einstein came up with it, but it's in there. If you do a simple dimensional scaling analysis of the gravitational field equations, you'll see that on the left-hand side, you have G sub mu nu, which is really space-time geometric curvature. Let's call it that. Geometric curvature is on the order of what? It's on the order of 1 divided by the superforce times energy density. And a stress energy mass tensor, T sub mu nu, which is really corresponding to matter. So the more matter, the more energy density you pack at a point in space-time, the more you distort space-time curvature. Hence, you change the geometry of space-time itself locally.
And what this says at the end of the day is that there's an extraordinary amount of untapped energy available in one unit of this system.
This superforce resides at the Planckian scale on the order of what? 10 to the minus 35 meters. So it's at every point in space and time at 10 to the minus 35 meters, which talks to what? Quantum entanglement. Remember, quantum mechanics is non-local due to what? A measurement in one place provides, say, it talks about a measurement in another place, and also it has no variables that transport information locally. Well, both of these ideas of non-locality can be spoken to by the superforce. The superforce is this unbelievable potential, an energy gradient operating at the Planck scale that is at every point in space and time. So in a way, you can say every point in space and time is connected. They're all connected. It's all connected.
Yeah, I would think like the web makes sense, right? If you think about any points in a spider web, it has the entire tension of the network available to it, right? It can do all of the work of the whole network, actually. And so you can collapse down the whole tensile energetics of the system to one point if you want to.
Look at the truss structure on a bridge. Why is the truss structure so important? Because of its force. again, the idea of taking force.
Well, you're distributing all of that force, right? That's why the truss structure doesn't collapse. Is it's being distributed.
Yeah, it's not like every single point in the truss structure is taking the
No, but if
the
you were
entire force of the bridge.
But if you disable some points, right? If you isolate some points in that truss structure,
It takes
you get all the recoil of the whole structure as it collapses at that point.
divided by all of the other remaining points.
Well, if it breaks at that one point, it will dissipate all of that
You
tension.
get all that energy packed into that focal point, correct?
Well, hold on. I don't think, no, because I mean, like, look, if every single point where the truss is attached is taking some fraction of the total distribution of weight of the bridge, when that truss breaks, what happens is that it loads all of the other trusses by a proportional amount, pushing them beyond their operational window and then creating a cascading failure. It's not the fact that it's taking the entire weight of the bridge onto that one point.
I know. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that like the last fiber of connectivity there during the failure of that truss, the last fiber of tension that breaks is going to take the recoil of the entire weight of the bridge.
I don't think. Why?
Because it's going to be releasing all of that tension backwards. It's just like every action has an
energy has
equal and
to go
opposite.
somewhere.
Yeah,
Energy conservation.
it has to go backwards. It's just like the basic Newtonian mechanics.
But the only energy that's located there is the energy that is the fraction of the total energy that truss is responsible for.
It'll feel the entire weight of the bridge when it collapses. That last little molecule.
I don't totally understand, because I mean, like, that truss never experiences the full weight of the bridge.
No, it doesn't. But once the thing is dissipated, it does.
Hold on, be more specific. What do you mean by once the thing is dissipated? Because like the bridge isn't vaporizing. The bridge it has another 300 trusses, which take the mass and the weight of the bridge.
Right, but now you've just destabilized that whole structure.
So
right?
now there's 299 of them that are dividing the whole weight of the bridge.
But they're all recoiling against that one point.
But they're all. But it's not the entire weight of the bridge that they're recoiling against. It's the amount of weight of the bridge that truss is responsible for.
No, it's the entire bridge. I'm sorry. It's just like it has to be treated as a full system at that point.
I don't understand. Okay, I mean, I don't understand why, but perhaps
in my opinion, Nastya, you really have the mind of a great physicist. You question the fundamentals. That's why I remember that podcast so well, that you questioned what's the electric charge. You know, I remember you saying something that you actually went to your thesis advisor and said, without this, I can't go further. I must understand. Oh, wow. You know, I've never done that. I'll tell you the truth. There are many gaps in my understanding of physics. I recognize that. But what I know really well. But I totally admire your, you have the makings of a great physicist.
I just want to understand. I think that it's not about the makings of a.
Understand fundamentals. You want to understand exactly why that happens.
I have to be able to make sense of something, and that's the only thing that I'm really ever after. And I feel like I'm denser than most people, actually, because these things take a really long time for me to understand. But I think that
I guess, like, I thought of an analogy that might help you understand better. It's like, if I take a rubber band, stretch it between my two fingers, and I let go this hand recoils with the full weight of the other hand.
That's because you only have 2 points.
But if I could have a whole web over here that's also in that rubber band, then it's going to feel the weight of all those points when it recoils. Anyways, that's the best I can do for today.
But the recoil would divide over all of those points. So each point wouldn't feel the full recoil, it would feel a fraction of the recoil.
That's breaking loose would feel the full weight of the entire structure.
Civil engineering, static, yeah.
We're gonna have to call Doug up. we have a friend who engineers bridges. I need to phone a friend. Okay, I'll ask Doug about this later.
No, but like, what was really interesting about that experience that Anastasia had, and you know, we were kind of going through it together at the academy at the time. And what was really interesting is just that the biologists are like, go ask the physicists. And we had some of the greatest. You know, we had wonderful physicists. One of my big heroes growing up was Peter White. He ran this blog like back before blogs were a thing almost, called Not Even Wrong, where he was picking on string
I think I
theory.
heard of him.
He started in 2004. I actually looked this up the other day, so he was like pretty late. I thought that he started in the 90s, but he started like
2004 was pretty early for me in terms of the blog world.
You know,
that's
Peter?
because he lived in Ohio.
I lived in Ohio, yeah. But what was really interesting is I went and talked to Peter, and I went and talked to a lot of physicists, actually. I was in this weird lab that was half physics department, half material scientists, climate scientists, biologists. It was kind of a weird lab. And so I had a lot of friends in the physics department. And the physicists are like, that's not our problem. So it was a very strange place to be pinned between the biologists saying that that's the physicist's problem, the physicists being like, that's not our problem, and nobody really willing to take up the philosophical nightmare of considering these fundamental questions. Like, they'll try to kick it to the philosophers, but the philosophers will say, no, that's a physics problem. And it's an interesting orphaned idea.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you are 100%. A lot of people, they basically say, I don't have the time. I have my own research. I have to publish so many papers. That's why I did not stay in academia, because I realized it would just be an exercise in publishing ideas that have already been looked upon by others. Just keep on publishing new data, maybe a couple of new experiments, blah, blah, change a couple of parameters, publish a new paper, then make sure other people don't go against your ideas. Again, it's so much politics in academia. I don't think I could have.
They gave you some funding, right, to work on these this Superforce.
Naval Innovative Science Engineering.
What's up with that? What was that like trying to, what was your experience? Can you talk about it at all?
It was great. Sure. First and foremost, I love the United States Navy. I absolutely love them. In my opinion, them and also the Space Force, the Air Force, they're all great. The Army, they have, sometimes they put some money aside to make sure that their civilians, put it this way, that they don't just work on rudimentary armament, this, blah, blah, that they also get into the minutia of science to understand fundamental physics. Is very important. So it's something called basic research. That's what I got the money for. The whole idea, can I prove that such energy density, such high energy electromagnetic fluxes can come about? So we actually ran an experiment called the high energy electromagnetic field generator. HIMFIG, it's known as HIMFIG, high energy electromagnetic field generator. If you Google it, you find out all kind of information on it. Eventually, the whole idea is that we were trying to spin these electrified solids up to even 100,000 RPM. So we're talking about 10,000 radians per second, extremely high frequency of spin from that point of view, and see whether we can get certain energy densities, or in this case, electromagnetic radiation to form. Exactly how. Again, this would speak toward eventually being able to affect the Schwinger limit. The whole, and Nastya, you asked, what's the Schwinger limit? The whole idea is if you put a great amount of energy density within a point in space-time, say something on the order of 10 to the 25 joules per meter cube. If you get that kind of energy density that speaks to an electromagnetic energy flux on the order of about 10 to the 33 watts per meter square, if at that point you basically can take space-time apart. This is what this particle, antiparticle, the so-called Dirac sea, this is what it's all about. This whole idea, really, when you form these particle-antiparticle pairs, that's what you're doing. You're taking apart space-time. And it's space-time that's trying to prevent your craft from truly moving. It's like once you put a hole in it, it's a whole different ball game.
So in this experiment, are you just spinning electrical conductors?
This one was based on spin, but the kind of energy densities that would take to break the Schwinger limit, the best way to do it is you drive a non-equilibrium plasma far from equilibrium, say through accelerated vibration at a certain frequency.
So are you using
tap
enormous
amount of
sound?
energy density at a point. Why not? You could use sound. You could use acoustics. For example, ultrasounds on the order of what? What's the, like about
40
25?
kilohertz.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
I only know that because I worked with these atomic force microscopes in grad school, and you have to tune the cantilever every time, basically, when you start doing it. And we had this really crazy peak that was always showing up on our spectra, and we all just kind of ignored it for most of the time I was there. And one day, the batteries died in the sensor that turned the lights on when you came in and out of the room, and the peak was gone. And we were like, oh, that's the ultrasonic sensor in the room that's doing that. And it was at exactly this beautiful peak at 40 kilohertz. And so,
why do you think electromagnetic pulses can be so incredibly devastating?
I mean, it's a lot of energy in a little bit of time, I suppose.
Let's just leave it there. Yeah. For example, one way to drive plasmas is with attosecond lasers. Attosecond lasers, anyone? The 2023 Nobel Prize in Physics. Why would you want to study attosecond lasers? But anyway, I'll leave it there for the minds of your subscribers to
World War III, Star Wars, yeah, something terrible, I'm sure.
Yeah, attosecond lasers are the kind of lasers that you can do to do some wonderful things to space-time, among other things.
It's interesting that
attosecond is not enough.
It's interesting that the government is willing to invest in these basic science ideas. Like, I wonder if you have any insight into how that's worked out for them in the past.
Thank goodness that that's possible, because otherwise I don't think that you would have the advances in science that you would get otherwise. Otherwise, it would all be and I've worked for one of the military contractors that's in everybody's mouth these days. I work for Northrop Grumman. I respect Northrop Grumman immensely. Again, everything would be in the arena of industrial complex, let's call it that. If it wasn't for these research money that the Navy would basically give its own civilians. Well, the Army has stuff too, and so does the Air Force. I mean, Air Force research laboratories, AFRL is one of the best. The Navy Research Laboratory, another great one. Speaking of your, you mentioned the atom bomb. It was an NRL research that looked first and foremost into that. At one point, the great Edward Teller, some people say he wasn't great because of what he did to Oppenheimer, blah, blah. I don't look at politics. I look at physics. And Edward Teller was a giant in physics. So let's leave it at that.
Well, with something like the Manhattan Project, there was a huge number of people that were working on the technology. They were all pushing to be able to produce this really defined product, and everyone knew what they were going for and were cohesively working towards it. But it sounds like with the Superforce stuff, you're the only person who's working on it, and you're getting a lot of pushback.
I doubt that very much. I have not looked. I should do more research into the origins, whether someone has already seen the C to the fourth divided by big G. I doubt very much if I'm the first who's come up with this formula.
Well, it just sounds like you're not part of a Manhattan Project type thing that is producing it, is kind of what I mean.
What I pride myself on is this equation 1 in the Superforce paper, because I think it's so important. We have to speak to it. So sometime within the interview, please let's go back to equation 1. But anyway, again, so going back to Teller, I mean, if it wasn't for Edward Teller, we would never have gotten to the thermonuclear, the hydrogen thermonuclear device. the Telaula mechanism. So again, politics aside, no matter, look at the greatness of this physicist. And some people will say, oh my goodness, but he brought about this unbelievable weapon. This weapon should never be used. They should act in deterrence of everything. Are you mad? Why would you use a weapon that can take out the entire world? No, absolutely not. That's, again, his intentions were totally misunderstood. Everybody thought he was a bloodthirsty man. No. Teller was a giant among giants, but okay.
It seems to be working, at least up to the present moment. I mean, we haven't had a nuclear war since 1945.
Nobody wants to experience the after effects. You would be absolutely insane to use these weapons. And trust me, there would be things that would make the Teleulam device a pop gun in comparison.
That's what worries me, is that there does appear to be insane people who get a hold of states from time to time. Like, that doesn't seem completely out of the question. I mean, I wonder if this mutually assured destruction stuff is a valid theory, because it's treating people as rational actors who wouldn't want to destroy the world, but you have groups who are intent on destroying other groups, and that's really baked into their ideology, and let alone individuals who are just insane.
We must, and that's what I'm saying. Physics should bring about this force of unification. Unless we come together, this world will fall apart. We must somehow bring diplomacy into the forefront of things. Weapons, especially weapons of mass destruction, should be should be no resort, because absolutely no one benefits. What? You want the destruction of mankind? The whole idea of having a great physics is to bring about technological advances to improve the state of civilization, not to destroy it.
But something like this is a weapon as much as it is a mode of propulsion, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like, are we ready for that were we ready for nuclear power? And because with every one of these advances in our understanding of nature at a more fundamental level comes, of course, great power, but it also comes this ridiculous responsibility that maybe being able to manipulate things on the Planck scale at that level results in even more like you would propose, results in extraordinary energy potentials. And we could not only be looking at destroying countries, but like the whole planet at that point or something. And so
everything can be weaponized.
Yeah, are we ready for that?
That's the reality we must deal with. But if we are to evolve as a civilization, we must challenge this. We must actually say, for our own sake, for the survival of our civilization, let's talk. Let us unify. Let us come together. And a lot of people look toward globalism as a bad word. And so I am talking about unification of the species. This is the only way that we're going to survive.
Are you unique? I mean, I know you can't speak for the Navy or anything, but are you unique amongst your colleagues in being concerned with these ideas?
Not at all, sir. Every one of us thinks of this concept. We want what's good for humanity, for goodness sake. Just because we work for the armed forces of a nation are there to defend the nation in time of need. They're not there to take over someone else's land. They're not there to propagate war. The idea of peace being an intermission to war is the most abhorrent thing in the history of mankind. We must do away with such thoughts. Peace is the ultimate way that this civilization will survive. We must have peace. Without peace, there is nothing. Without unification, this civilization will break apart. There will be absolutely nothing left. We must come together somehow.
It's absolutely true. But then at the same time, you have these just insane individuals who want to build up their armed forces so that they can conquer other territories and so forth. And even our own country has like a long history of conquest. I mean, it seems to be something that's certainly diminishing, but there's always that risk, I guess, that somebody's not going to be interested in the military for defense, but for conquest, tyranny and oppression and things that we've tried to get away from in our constitutional government. I mean, it's really strange, like
it's scary.
Yeah,
I must say, these are very scary and dark times that we're living.
It's just a lot of power.
There are times I look at my 11-year-old daughter and I say, will she have a future? Will she know the happiness that I've experienced? I love this nation. I want it to go on to the very heights that it can achieve. This is truly the last remaining democracy, the last bastion of freedom that we have left on this earth. If the United States of America falls, it is over for the entire world, not just for us. There are tyrannies out there ready to pounce on what remains of at that point, the carrion of civilization.
It also just seems like that would be such a waste of time, because ultimately people will reinvent democracy, whether it takes 10,000 years or what. I feel like it's just an inevitability. And so, abandoning it for all of its flaws and all the corruptions that have happened in recent times and in modern times, it just seems like the wrong approach. And I think that people can really unify behind the idea of repairing and making, weeding out the corruptions, as opposed to just like throwing democracy on the pyre.
Yeah, sacrificing democracy for greed and power.
Or just laziness too, people just not having the opportunity to even get themselves involved and so forth. It's people get tired, beat down. Nasi, you look like you have something to say.
No, I was just contemplating how to connect this back to the fabric of space-time.
Again, we must make we must make physics again like in the times of not in the times of Einstein, because again that's really WW2, God forbid, but just bring back the common folk to have an interest in physics again, to truly maybe the Superforce idea is somehow a way of unification to get people interested. And why not let Joe the plumber publish in physical review letters? Why not? Because he doesn't have a physics degree from MIT. He should not be allowed to publish it. Why? Why must you call people crackpots, cranks, charlatans, call their work pseudoscience, scams? Give them, sometimes I wish there would be like an MMA for physics, where they put us in a cage, say me and a mainstream physicist, maybe 3 of them, I can take them on, and a blackboard. No physical. This will be a how should I say, a mortal combat of the minds. So.
And that's the best. That's the best way, right? Like a free market of ideas. There's just this real myth that bad ideas will somehow taint the waters, but it doesn't really play out that way. It's just that bad ideas just don't get referenced. Like you're not going to point to some really bad idea. The real world, the market of ideas will try ideas, and the obsession with weeding them out before they can make it to the marketplace just seems like a wasteful and useless enterprise.
I actually have been thinking a lot about this, and I think that there are ideas that capture the mind and then result in 1,000 years of darkness. And you have something like Aristotelian. Wow. I really think so. Like if you look at, we've been studying a lot about.
Just say that again, Nastya. Say that again. That is beautiful. Say that again. The exact phrase that you used.
That there are ideas that take hold of the imagination that lead to 1,000 years of darkness.
Absolutely, but is the problem in the receivers or in the antenna in that case?
I think it's both. I think that science is a cultural product, and so if you let's take a step back and let's say that the physical interpretation of general relativity as the bending of space-time is not the best possible version of how to look at that math. Then you have a century of people refusing to consider that there's a better way of looking at it because they like it because there are forces that drive them to want it. Like we had this really interesting conversation with a lady named Kathy Jacobs, who studies the history of physics.
Josephson, I believe.
Kathy Joseph. Just Joseph. It's not Josephson.
I think it's Joseph's son. I'll check.
No, because it's Brian Josephson is why you're thinking that. But anyways,
Oh,
the right, okay. But the point is that okay, so we were trying to get to the bottom of like, okay, so why does the ether die? Because
You're right.
space time looks like something that's kind of
Kathy Joseph. You're right.
kind of etheric, but the idea of there being a luminiferous ether, the idea of there being a medium through which light travels dies. And it turns out that the German scientists who were really big on ether started to say that relativity was the Jewish science. And because relativity was called the Jewish science because they were anti-Semites, then the rest of the world, who was aghast at the anti-Semitic tendencies of the Germans, was like, you know what? Screw you. It's the right science. It's not the Jewish science. And so there's this cultural context in which we take up ideas and we carry them like banners, because the same reason that people took up arms and joined the Knights Templar during the Middle Ages. We want to be able to go out and we want to be able to tell people that the way that we see the world is the right way to see the world with a capital R. And that is the basis of humans generating ideas.
Propagating ideas.
Generating and propagating, because people propagate their ideas. How many times have we met people who are like, my idea is the correct idea?
yeah, I've met a lot of those.
Right? And so
Yeah.
there's
Hard to deal with them.
And so with something like this, I think that it is actually really important for ideas to be as close to accurate and good as possible, because people get gripped by fanaticism and will follow bad ideas off a cliff.
All ideas should have a chance to be heard. It
I
is
agree
up
with that.
to the person that hears it whether to accept them or not. But all ideas should have a chance to be heard. And that is not done in current day mainstream physics, unfortunately. I have a great respect for physicists. I have a great respect for academia. I'm trying extremely hard to get these ideas accepted by them. It's not as if I'm saying, oh, no, I know what you're told, I'm the best, no, not at all. I'm just trying to get my perspective seen. Again, new perspective on all physics. Let's have a conversation. Inside that MMA cage is not going to be mortal combat by physical means. No, combat by minds. You give us a blackboard. You give us a finite amount of time, say 2 hours, in which I go to the blackboard and I try to convince 3 major physicists, say someone on the order of Nima Haqqani Hamed, David Gross, Juan Maldacena, that I know what I'm talking about. And if in those 2 hours, they have listened to me, they have come up with counterpoints and truly, truly listened to that idea, and then they show me where I've gone wrong, I promise you I will leave that cage and never to be seen or heard from again.
I think that that's possible. I think that if we succeed at this podcast 10 years from now, and we have a big enough audience that those people can't ignore us, then that is possible. I think
Like
that's
a PhD
really the
qualifier, like a PhD qualifier for Joe the plumber. Here comes someone with an idea that is not of the pedigree of these people from Institute of Advanced, the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton and so forth. Someone that is, put it this way, is not at such a high level of physics, but has some ideas that at least the people, for example, your subscribers, your audience, would say, maybe this guy should be given a chance, or this person, this girl, whatever, should be given a chance to be heard. And why not Joe the plumber? Why? Because Joe the plumber doesn't have a physics degree from MIT, should not be listened to? You forget, Lenny Susskind was a plumber in Brooklyn before he became the great physicist he is today. And he is a great physicist. Lenny Susskind should be there with the
I think it's
other
possible.
3.
I think it's possible. I think that it can and will happen, barring any car accidents or anything like that. I think that people are hungry for that level of discourse. The fact that people who are plumbers are listening to this kind of material in their spare time is
There you go.
absolutely
And
promising.
These meetings of the minds, these let's call them MMA, Mortal Kombat of the minds, they should be televised. They should. So in other words, everyone should be given a chance to see whether you are able to convince, or because it's very easy if it's in closed, in a closed room. No, it's not televised, not recorded. It's very easy to say, "Oh, he had no idea what he was talking about." No, let posterity decide whether your idea holds any salt or not. If it doesn't, fine, send the person on their way, but at least they tried. The idea of not even being heard, not even being given a chance. You know how many people I send that paper to? Rejection after rejection, sometimes within hours. You cannot tell me. I mean, maybe, you're absolute genius and you have nothing better to do for that day, so you've read the 3-page paper. That's possible. Within an hour, say, that's not work. But just equation 1, just from that alone, should be at least submitted for review.
All right, let's deal with
Show something.
Let's deal with equation 1.
Okay, equation 1. Superforce, the fundamental force of unification. It's that paper that I'm talking about.
Yes, and so
Because that paper is the revised paper of another one called On the Existence of the Superforce, the possible fundamental force of unification. And I said, why not give it a stronger title? So I put Superforce all in caps, and I didn't say the possible. I said the fundamental force of unification. Again, sometimes you have to challenge the elites. Why not? This is how the status quo is broken. This is how advances in physics are made. Again, this is not new physics. This is a new perspective on all physics. That's all the Superforce represents, a new perspective on all physics. So
is the Superforce the same as the Planck force? Somebody mentioned that to me this morning.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is the Planck force, which is really an energy gradient at the Planck scale. That's all it represents. So if you look at equation 1, you see c to the 4th divided by big G is equals, again, the Planck mass times c squared divided by the Planck length. And when you do the math, comes out to what? 10 to the 44 newtons. C to the 4th divided by big G. But what's incredible in that equation is that the next step equals the mass of the observable universe times c squared divided by what we understand as the radius of the observable universe. And remember that in Einstein's equation, there is a 1 divided by 8 pi. I'm not sure whether that should be as part of the Superforce formula. So I left it out. I just choose to call it the Planck force. The Superforce is really the Planck force. I'm not sure whether that 8 pi, see, that 8 pi, that pi to me always talks to some sort of, for example, the reduced Planck constant. It's really based on it's h divided by 2 pi, but that 2 pi is really important from a geometric curvature point of view. Again, it talks to the geometry of the problem. If that 8 pi isn't there, then it's exact. It's not on the order to as equation 1 is now written. It's exact because then it talks 10 to the 27. That's the exact, what's on the almost the exact observable radius of our so-called the horizon scale.
Okay, so what is the significance of dividing the Planck mass by the Planck length? You're taking the smallest possible mass, dividing it by the smallest possible length. What is? It's
energy. It's a rest energy within a particular point in space-time. It's the Planck mass at that particular times c squared equal mc squared. only that your M is now really the Planck mass because you're dealing with Planck scales.
But why
So
do you
that's
divide
what
it by
it
the
is.
length to get to get a point
Because
value?
that's what a force is. It's an energy gradient. That's how it comes about. That's what a force is all about. It's an energy gradient. Hence speaking to the idea that at every point in space and time, there's a rest energy associated with it. There's an energy within that so-called space-time geometric structure. Now, some people say it's all about information. That could be. But again, that refers to Max Tegmark's idea of our mathematical universe. And I tend to think of it more of energy than information. But I'm not taking away from the idea of information because possibly information speaks to consciousness, hence. And we have to speak about what I mean by super force to super bang to super intelligence eventually.
Mm-hmm. So, but I wanna get to this interconversion of E equals mc squared to the superforce, because you're saying that the superforce equation takes the same form as E equals mc squared, but because you're dividing by the Planck length, you get a point value for the energy that's contained rather than something that's relative to the size of the body.
All I'm saying, look at that first equation. It really says the superforce equals with what? An energy gradient at the Planck scale and equals to or on the order of an energy gradient at the horizon scale. How can the smallest, or what we understand as the smallest possible scale, compare to the greatest possible scale if it wasn't for the superforce? And what's incredible about it, the superforce, because it's the Planck force, it's the one Planckian parameter that does not have H, the quantum of action in it. That by itself means it's the bridge between our classical world and our quantum reality. Hence, it may signify a path toward quantum gravity.
It is derived from the Planckian mechanics, though, which for me means that the conclusions we draw can only be confined to ideal black bodies.
I will not go toward that. I'm just speaking from a general relativity point of view.
One thing with the general relativity that's really interesting to me is
Field equations, it's in there.
Right. One thing that's really interesting from that perspective is that there's this really cool paper everybody should check out. It's called "What is the Stiffness of Space-Time?" It's from the Joseph Henry Labs at Princeton by this gentleman named Kirk McDonald, and the tension of space-time that he averages out is in the same force range as what you're proposing, which I think is just an interesting coincidence. Again, I don't think there's.
It doesn't mean I'm the first.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I'm not an originalist in this C to the fourth divided by big G.
He's using the same.
Is equation one. Is this idea? How can this be at both the Planckian and the horizon scales, unless it is the superforce that is the path to quantum gravity?
Yeah, and of course, Kirk's using the same equations to derive his relationship. You know, he's just starting with the slight reconception of space-time where, you know, it's like matter tells space-time how to bend sort of thing, and rearranging that in a hooky.
John Archibald Wheeler's.
Okay.
Matter tells space-time how to curve, and space-time tells matter how to move.
Right, so it's sort of like applying a force to a spring in some sense. This is the way that McDonald reimagines it. The warping, the energy required to warp or say tug on it, if you want to use mass, is in some sense an elastic relationship. I mean, you guys are all starting from the same basic set of equations, so it's not totally surprising to me that you would come up with similar conclusions. I don't think that there's any problems with the logical processing of your maths and the way that you arrive at this equation. The only thing that I'm...
But don't forget.
The only thing... Sorry?
Don't forget the second page. The second page in that paper. Remember, just a three-page paper, and really the last page is just like a conclusion, a summary of of what's found, an acknowledgement, and like 7 references. Most likely, that's one of the things that really truly it rubs them the wrong way. Too little references, they want a huge bibliographical list of things. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but look carefully at page 2 in that paper, because it really says that if you remember that the strong nuclear force, right, divided by the electromagnetic force is on the order of 1 divided by the fine structure constant, you can see that the gravitational force equals the strong nuclear force at the Planck scale, equals the superforce. That cannot just be a mere coincidence. That is force unification. And then you can also find the superforce, the c to the 4th divided by big G. You can find it in Schrodinger's equation and hence in the Dirac equation, because the Dirac equation is the Schrodinger equation plus special relativity, which is really relativistic mass.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, I think the processing, the logic, the mathematics is not problematic at all here. I think the only issue is that you guys are all basing your understanding.
It's complicated. It's really simple. It's simple
math. Right. But the only issue is that you guys are doing all the empirical basis of this. All of this work is ideal black bodies, and most materials aren't ideal black bodies. Is the problem, and so the scaling of these concepts is going to vary based on the material that you're describing. So it's not that there's any issue with the equations or anything like that. It's just the equations are based on a very idealized system, and nature is complex and not idealized.
And that's why I never use, if you notice all these equations that I've put forward, especially equation 1, it has a swiggle, because I'm not quite sure if the 8 pi should be in there. Again, it's on the order of. That swiggle, or however you define that term, that little S on kind of like a horizontal S, that swiggle really means on the order of. So you may be correct.
I just think, like, at the end of the day, like, I don't think you'll be able to get rid of Planck's constant at the end of the day, because I think that it will be 2 different constants. It's a material dependent constant. And so you will have an H divided by an H prime, or some different material, H alpha divided by H beta.
It would be on the order of 1.
It depends if you have like a perfect reflector, or if you have a gas, or what the material substrate of your analysis is, right? But I'm not saying that to invalidate your work in any way. I just want to put this caveat that there's more depth available to this analysis.
All that I bring forward on that table, all I put on the table is, why is equation 1 possibly correct? That's my question to mainstream physics. Explain to me, if the superforce does not have some rudimentary application or should be looked into more closely, why is that true? Why is that relationship? That speaks to Dirac's large number hypothesis.
Break that down for me.
I wish I could. The best person, I believe there's a gentleman that helped Dr. Robitaille, I believe, write this book that the sun is...
oh yeah, that book wasn't by... Pierre didn't have anything to do with that book.
Unzicker.
Yeah.
His name is Unzicker.
Yeah, Pierre didn't write that book or have anything to do with it.
Look toward his podcast. He has a podcast on Dirac's large number hypothesis. But it speaks to this idea. Why do these numbers that are extremely large also speak to quantum mechanics? Again, signifying macroscopic quantum phenomena.
All right, I'll ask him about this.
Our reality is quantum in nature, truly. And yet...
Certainly electromagnetics are, yeah. I mean, certainly light from black bodies is, that's apparent. There's certainly some quantum of action with light and electromagnetism by inference. Crossing the line over to gravity seems to be the real prize of the fight right now, right?
But what if the graviton and the photon are related? Remember that whole idea of spin 2 versus spin 1? But anyway.
I'm looking at Dirac's large number hypothesis, and it's basically that there's a couple of ratios that are all in the same order of enormous size, like 10 to the 40 orders of magnitude. And so big G, so big G
44,
is
right?
inversely proportional to the age of the universe. And then the mass of the universe is proportional to the square of the universe's age. And they're both on the order of 40 orders of magnitude. And his conclusion from it is that physical constants aren't constant, their values depend on the age of the universe. Which kind of feeds back into what we're talking about with Planck, which is that if there is this relationship, it is particular to the various physical systems in which the relationship is derived. But Dirac's is a larger statement about the relation of the universe. But I think that the idea within it is that there is a feedback between these systems.
I mean, all of these seem to be rooted in this desire to universalize your findings, right? It's like, this holy grail of unification and the ability to make one statement here that holds everywhere has really driven a lot of the motivation, I feel like. But I don't know that, I feel like it's a bit of a Sisyphean task too at the same time. Nature is very complex. The things that happen in one system might be like a galaxy sort of looks like a hurricane, but it's not quite the same thing, right? There's these processes that you really want to universalize, but it's just not that simple at the end of the day. I understand why
people
want to do it.
But I'm not beating my chest with my fist and saying, I am correct, I know the Superforce. All I'm doing is putting out equation 1. I'm putting this 3-page paper, which is extremely simplified mathematics. Anyone can read it. Anyone can understand it. And saying, does the Superforce represent a possible path to quantum gravity? Can it unify the realms of the very large, hence general relativity, and the realms of the very small, hence quantum mechanics? That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking. If it is, and we can nudge the Superforce, the advanced technologies that can come from this are amazing. Now, whether they can be weaponized or not, that's a question for maybe a different podcast. We already discussed partially of that nightmare that it can represent, but it does not have to go that way.
By the way, I contacted Doug. I found a friend. And Doug says that the individual trusses do not experience the entire load of the bridge.
Upon collapse?
Upon collapse?
We're talking about the recoil of the collapse, essentially.
An individual truss never experiences the full weight of the bridge upon breaking. When the bridge starts to break, like when you start to get a global collapse, maybe?
That's all I'm talking about.
You're talking about a single truss, though.
I'm talking about the recoil of one against the mass of the rest of them.
So that it's distributed, so each truss experiences the force of the things that are pushing on it nearby, and that is distributed immediately. It never, like the truss that's here does not experience directly the force of the truss that's all the way away. It experiences the force as modulated by the trusses that are near it, and so when it breaks, all of those trusses take the force, and then that's where it stops.
I'm gonna have to unpack this with Doug.
Okay, we'll deal with this. But so, look.
You do great in a static mechanics course.
maybe one day.
The professor would have to give you personal attention. Most definitely. Well, anyone that wants to understand the nature of electric charge is remarkable, in my opinion. So, hey, Shiloh, you chose good.
Well,
anyway.
Let's be honest. I chose Shiloh.
All right.
He had little choice in the matter.
Now the truth comes out. Well, actually, that's always the truth. So, yeah, it is. Anyway.
I don't think that arguing about the math is... I hate arguing about the math because I think that the math is... The math is...
I actually don't think there's any problem with the math.
And sure, and I think that, okay, so as long as you get to the point where there's no problem with the math, we stick with it.
And then the cool thing is, if you found a unique relationship in the math that's in somehow simplifying and interesting, we should definitely be talking about what this means. And I think that's where the physics comes back into the discussion.
Because I think,
again,
if I
why should the strong nuclear force? I'm sorry, Nastya. I'm sorry to interrupt you, and you can go from the just permit me to reiterate, because it's an important point. Why would the strong nuclear force equal the gravitational force equal the Planck force, which is the superforce at the Planck scale, unless there's something to the superforce, unless it truly represents the force of unification? A unified field theory.
Well, I was going to say that
depending on the force.
I think that what I wanted to say is that what this says to me is that the unification is a reasonable goal to work towards, but the unification has to be conceptual rather than mathematical. We have the mathematical formula that says unification is possible because you can create these relationships and they hold across these different scales. And the next level of it is to say, okay, how does that actually work in terms of the bodies and what they're doing? And what does that say about the source of gravity and the source of electricity and the source of inertia and all of these other things? Because we must be able to construct something that is continuous as it goes from the quantum world to the relativistic world.
I remember you and Shallow were discussing, for example, the nature of the proton, that you really want to understand the nature of light and the proton. Let's bring it to the proton. Look at equation 1. If you take equation 1 and for that mc squared divided by, say, a characteristic length, you put in the mass of the proton, 10 to the minus 27 kilograms times c squared, which is like 10 to the 17th. You divide that. If you divide that by 10 to the minus 54 meters, it comes out to the superforce.
What is the 10 to the minus 54 meters, though?
Believe it or not, that's the Schwarzschild radius for a proton. If the proton was to be modeled as a black hole, that's the representative radius, 10 to the minus 54 meters. Which means what? It's the superforce that makes the proton act as a black hole. You should try to contact Nassim Haramein and point that to him, because that speaks greatly to what he was trying to bring to the forefront of things.
We definitely want to, but no email yet.
Yeah. So what is, can you define black hole for us?
The way I look at it is a point of incredibly high energy density within, say, a particular locality of space-time, to the point that the curvature is so incredibly high, it actually puts a hole in it. Hence the Schwinger limit. You put a hole in space-time. That's why these particle-antiparticle pairs form, because you have ripped apart, locally, you have ripped it apart. You've torn apart space-time at that particular locality.
Okay, so
that's what a black hole represents to me.
Let's take a...
Of course, they come in different sizes. And that's very interesting as well.
Let's take a pause here. Let's take a bio break. Consider coming to Austin in April of 2024 for our very first scientific conference. It is going to be called Demysticon. It is timed to coincide with the April 8th solar eclipse. It's going to be 2 days of talks from our favorite guests. Right now we have Ogi Ogus, we have Steve Keen, we have Pierre-Marie Robitaille, we have David Ian Howe, and we have John F. White, who runs the Craig and Ford YouTube channel, who are all going to come and give talks about the subjects that they're most interested in. Tickets are available in the link in the description. So come over to our Patreon, help promote the podcast, and make sure that you get tickets to our event. So while we were on break, I had a thought, which was...
You were discussing static mechanics of trusses.
We did discuss the static mechanics of trusses, but we also discussed the equivalence between the Planck length, or the ratio of the Planck mass to the Planck length, and the mass of the universe and the radius of the universe. And I'm like, so when we derive the mass and the length of the universe, do we not use Planck length and Planck mass in that derivation? Because that's not a measurement. That's something that you calculate.
I'm not sure exactly how they arrived at the idea of observable universe mass on the order of 10 to the 53 kilograms, and I think observable radius on the order of, say, 10 to the 26, say 10 to the 27 meters. I'm not sure exactly how they arrived. I believe it was experimental. I do not think that was theoretical. I could be completely wrong, but again, the equation 1 says something very strange. It actually says that if, for example, one day they find out that the radius of the observable universe on the order, say 10 to the 80 meters, it'll give you what the mass in it is. What does it say? What space-time geometric structure? It's as if there's a grid there of some sort.
Like a uniformity in distribution?
It's interesting. Put it this way. It's interesting. Why should the horizon scale and the Planck scale be comparable? And why should they be related to the superforce that you find in the Dirac equation?
I guess it makes sense to me because all of astronomy, all of astrophysics is determined from light. That's all you have. I mean, electromagnetic radiation in general. So if you're studying electromagnetic radiation, making conclusions, and then also your fundamental physics are derived from studying black bodies and light production, and the Planck constant falls out from that directly, then why shouldn't studying astrophysical bodies also in some way relate to, it just makes sense. You're studying light in all the cases, as far as I can tell.
I'd agree with that.
Awesome.
I'm still trying to get to the bottom of how it is that we figure out the mass and the radius of the universe, because I feel like if there is some kind of Planckian aspect to how those are calculated or even how they're derived, then it would make perfect sense that the two of them would give the same ratio, because you're starting with the Planck.
And I'm not sure there is. See,
that's the question.
Exactly
That's the question.
Right. That's the question. If there isn't, then whoa.
Well,
see what I mean?
I think I have a little bit of an understanding of how this works in terms of the fact that you get the mass from this Eddington mass-luminosity relationship, and the mass-luminosity relationship is scaled by the color of the star, and that's supposed to give you something about the temperature of the star, and so you reconstruct this based on a Planckian understanding of the black body radiation of the star. And so there is, again, you're looking at light at the end of the day to make all of these deductions. And so your fundamental understanding of light is going to figure into every single aspect of your conclusions.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's very astute, which is that the light is the scaling factor in all of it, because that's what you're looking at in order to get at these fundamental aspects.
And not just any light, but black body radiation. And the conclusion is that we can make statements about the universe based on black body radiation, but I don't think that that's a valid way of approaching things, because not all materials act as perfect black bodies. Some of them actually act as perfect anti-black bodies. That's what a mirrored system is. And so...
But you do agree that the gravitational field equations, Einstein's gravitational field equations, have been tested and retested and proven to be correct.
Well, they're kind of up against the ropes right now with all this galactic rotation business and so forth. But I mean, yeah, they in certain contexts they've been validated over and over again. I believe they're descriptive of a general pattern of motion, at least within some contexts.
One of our audience members, we were talking to them earlier today, Neil had a really good question, which was, if gravity is mediated by space-time, why are the other forces mediated by bosons?
It's a very, very good question.
Neil's the sharpest tool in the shed, for sure.
But again, because they brought the geometry of space-time into it. Maybe it's about a force. Maybe it's not about space-time curvature. It looks like it is, but that, again, if you rearrange the terms of that and you think of it as a superforce as a scalar operator, then it really says the superforce acting on the spatio-temporal geometric structure gives rise to energy density, hence matter.
Yeah, for me, just rationalizing it makes sense that we're talking about the amount, like, I think of the whole thing as a giant spider web. I think that's the most rational way to look at it in terms of how these tensions are being maintained and so forth. And for me, it's like, you're talking about how much...
I'm trying to say, bring force back into it. This is one way to bring force back into it. We know how to deal with forces. And don't forget the other three forces, the electromagnetic, the weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force. They're forces. They're not space-time curvature.
I mean, force
So
is
that's
a
what
little
I'm
bit
saying.
better. It's a little bit better, right? But force is also not.
It implies an action. It
implies an action, which implies actors too. And I guess it's easier for me it's hard to construct a sentence without actors in it, right? To talk about something that went down without the people that participated. And so I'm just hypothetically putting in some sort of spider web to be the actor. And these actions and tensions that we're describing are a result of that interconnectivity. It's like, I think that's what we're talking about, is just the amount of tension that any one point in this web is experiencing at any given moment. And of course, if light is being relayed as deformations, that is, as waves of tension in this material, light and gravity, both waves of tension, just oppositionally, then you have, tension and relaxation, then you can start to make sense physically of what's going on here. And I think that's what Kirk McDonald's getting at when he talks about the stiffness of space-time, and that's why it turns out to be on the same tensile strength as what you're describing. Force is obviously a unit of tension also, just as much as it's a unit of push. So they're energetically equivalent. There's just like
an energy gradient. That's what force is. That's why equation 1 works that way, which is very strange why it does. And why does it speak to the proton possibly being a black hole? Why? The superforce, why does it make a proton seem, at least can be modeled as a black hole?
Yeah, I mean, another way to look at black holes is like where the boundary conditions of the formula, right? It's like where the model of relativity doesn't make sense anymore. We've reached beyond some boundary condition of what the model was. Like I worked in basic elastic mechanics in my PhD, and you always, when we make statements and we submit them to a journal, we don't say this formula is true, period. We say inside of these boundary conditions, this formula is true. And so another way of looking at that would be like, hey, these dynamics that we're talking about, these superforce, the tension, the Planck force, these things make sense in some boundary condition. But when we get to the center of the atom, there's something else happening. It's not the same electrodynamics that we're looking at everywhere else. This is another way of interpreting it anyways.
But I think the superforce drives everything. Absolutely everything. I think the superforce speaks to a super bang. And let me explain what I mean by super bang, and eventually a superintelligence. Don't forget that this whole universe of ours is mostly plasma.
Mostly
you agree
hydrogen.
with that statement?
Yeah. I mean, most of it's hydrogen, for that matter.
And the idea of having so many, 100 billion galaxies? 100 billion neurons? Again, the idea, it's you start wondering whether this plasma could actually achieve a consciousness by the way it's as if it's an electromagnetic web, a grid somehow, that not only does it contain all this plasma, but makes it dynamic, makes it act in certain ways, possibly coming into a super consciousness. But anyway, let me talk to the super bang, and not the big bang, but the super bang.
Can I just add one thing before we move past the plasma thing?
Sure.
Because I kind of agreed to that too quickly, but I mean, I do think that the word plasma is a huge umbrella that covers a lot of different states of matter, and that's what the research seems to be. So we're not just talking about.
Get away from! Oh my goodness. Okay, small interruptions. I gotta get her away from this, otherwise, apologies.
Yeah, we have cat interruptions all the time. We were in the middle of filming a little video the other day, and our cat just mauled the curtain behind us, and we had to stop.
Really breaks the fourth wall.
I tell you, these cats, they rule us. They own us.
Yep.
I think we are the pet. But anyway. All right. Sorry about it.
I just want to make that aside that like plasma, you're right that most of the matter in the universe is in this state, but it's a very generic state that encompasses a lot of other kinds of states. You can think about plasma as it behaves in so many different ways that it's almost a useless word because it's so broad. But I do agree. Yeah. Most of the universe is hydrogen, and most of it appears to be in some electrically conductive state.
Thank you. Okay, let's talk to the super bang. Okay, I'm gonna bring about an analogy of what I think is happening. Are you acquainted with the idea of a supernova?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the way usually it happens is that eventually, I know what Pierre-Marie Robitaille's idea on this is, but let's go with the current understanding of stellar physics. The whole idea of the core bounds. Once the fuel is spent and so forth, this thing starts to gravitationally collapse to a point, say, on the order of 10 to the minus 15 meters. So on the order of 1 femtometer. What's at that point? At that point, the strong nuclear force really takes over. That's what makes the dynamics. That's what makes quantum dynamics work. It's the strong nuclear force at a scale of 10 to the minus 15 meters. Well, the density at that point is on the order of 10 to the 14 grams per centimeter cube, acting at 10 to the minus 15 meters. It experiences a core bounce because of the strong nuclear force. Is the strong nuclear force that says thus far and no further, and this thing bounces back. That's how a supernova comes about. And I'm going to make that analogy. The same thing is happening, only that this time is not the strong nuclear force acting at 10 to the minus 15 meters, but it's the superforce acting at the Planck scale. So again, something on the order of 10 to the 90 kilogram per meter cube. That's the energy that's commensurate. Let's call it a super density. That's the energy. I mean, yes, that's the density that's commensurate with the superforce, 10 to the 90 kilogram per meter cube at 10 to the minus 35 meters. So again, it doesn't go to zero. There's no such thing as space-time singularities. That's why I agree with Abba Ashtekar when he has this idea of a quantum bounce. This is how truly it comes about. And this is how this super bang is created. It's the super force that says thus far and no further, 10 to the minus 35 meters. And again, it experiences a bounce. I call it an Ashtekar bounce. And this is how the super bang comes around.
Where's the super bang? Is this related to the Big Bang? Is this an origin story?
It's basically the origin story.
I see.
What I think, it's the super force that's always been there, that's always acted. And as a result, what we're having is these super bangs that basically happen over and over again. And it's possible because of the nature of this cosmic construct that the universe sort of reinvents itself somehow.
Sounds like by manipulating this stuff, we're going to destroy the universe.
Yeah.
I think the superintelligence, if my instinct is correct, and this I go on pure speculation, pure instinct. If my instinct is correct, I think sooner or later, I think all this is part of a learning experience. It's a superintelligence basically trying different things, see what works, see what doesn't. Everything is interesting. It's like a super brain of some sort, this, but it's not artificial. This whole idea, if you ask me, this whole idea, anyway, I'm not gonna go there. It's the superintelligence, I believe, loves life, loves creation, and what we
Probably because that's what it feeds off of.
Quite possibly, but it's beautiful. Put it this way: it's not based on destruction. We only understand destruction. I truly believe all our physics is based on destruction. I believe the superintelligence uses creation to propagate its needs.
Do you think that there's other civilizations in other galaxies that are contributing to that superintelligence?
Everything is one. All is one. Everything is connected. And the superforce dictates that. That's the dictum. Okay. That is the ultimate law of nature.
Everything is connected, but on various timescales, right? Like the time scale of that there's a scaling factor of time for that connection. So something that's happening in Alpha Centauri is connected to us, but there's a lag time before we see the consequences of it.
The concept of time to me is a mystery. I would like to study it more. I do not believe that we truly understand what physical time represents. It could be that we're dealing with several temporal dimensions, just like I think there are more than the 3 spatial dimensions. That if you just look at Hilbert space, the whole idea of n-dimensional space, n goes to infinity, the limit of, but still, I think everything is possible. As a matter of fact, I believe there are no impossibilities. Everything is conditionally possible. The whole idea is to bring about, to satisfy the condition under which that impossibility becomes a possibility. That's what it's all about. There are no impossibilities, just conditional possibilities.
Well, there probably are fundamental impossibilities. Like something can't happen without a mechanism.
But maybe there are many roads to Rome. Just like the whole idea of Feynman's, the whole idea of the path integral. What if that so-called particle takes all those paths from A to B? And that's how quantum electrodynamics comes about.
In some sense, I view science as this whittling down of possibilities, for better or for worse. But I feel like in a real free market of ideas, you have all these possibilities on the table. And everybody is sort of comparing notes about what they think is possible. And hopefully the collective intelligence of that interaction is able to produce something that everybody can eventually get behind. I mean, that's the ideal hope that that's possible. Of course, maybe all that collective intelligence can make mistakes too. That's a hallmark of intelligence, is that it makes mistakes.
Absolutely. That's how it learns.
Right.
And it keeps on making them, and it keeps on retrying different things. It's like a ginormous experiment over and over. You change these parameters, but again, everything based on creation rather than destruction. It's so easy to destroy. It is so much harder to create.
That's definitely true. I mean, the goal of a planet, if you can put a teleological purpose on it, seems to be to continuously increase
a living planet, right?
Yes. I assume that all planets are living, actually.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
This is going to get into
well,
very
no,
intense territory.
I think that complexity of life is not the same.
Well, superintelligence speaks to a super consciousness. So why not? Why shouldn't they be?
Well, no, I think that life probably comes from some ordering of chemistry inside the body of a planet that eventually works its way up to the surface, where under the right conditions it can start to live. But I think that life is probably something that starts really early, and so most planets will have something that approximates the process of life. Just like all planets have storms on them, all planets have life.
Not all of them. I mean, some planets are just in a terrible position, right? They're not in a good place to be able to.
They did at some point, and so the remnants of it. Like you're right. So
I agree, but most people wouldn't.
That's fine. But let's say that the goal.
What if these planets? What if these planets are like the molecules of the super body?
Yeah, I think that people have talked about that before too, where there's, I mean, that's abstract enough for me that it's hard to, that goes even beyond my preferences for abstraction. But the point that I'm trying to make is that life on a planet has a goal, and that goal is to perpetuate more of life. And in order to do that past a certain point, you have to have intelligence, because your planet will die, and without intelligence, you and everything that you've ever done will die with it.
And it's quite possible that what lives on that planet, unless it learns new pathways toward creation rather than destruction, will eventually be eliminated, just like a bacteria, just a microorganism that's trying to infect the body, the planet. The planet will get rid of a civilization that's bent on destruction rather than creation. That's my belief.
I mean, that's Intuitively, I agree with that.
Value aligned.
Yeah, you do have to be value aligned, right? I think that when we talk about the idea of God, we have to talk about the idea of consequences. There are consequences for actions, and so if you live in a way that isn't aligned with the values of the system will destroy you because you have committed some kind of grave affront to the health of the entire system. But if this is the goal of planets, then you would expect that there would be intelligences elsewhere because Earth is special, but it's not exceptional. And so, do you think about this work in context of alien life and alien technology, or do you think that this is the first time that it's coming through in the universe now, in this time, in this place, in this moment?
Absolutely not. It's again, the superintelligence keeps on recreating itself over and over with these quantum bounces. Maybe every time. It may be that the space-time curve, the space-time geometrical curvature is this, or rather geometrical structure. I choose to use Schrodinger's words because I think they speak to a grid, something that's always been there. But it's the superforce that keeps on giving it this ability to recreate itself, to remodel itself, to try new things. What failed in one eon will not fail in the next. It is the ultimate experiment, an auto experiment that keeps on perpetuating.
It reminds
everything again based on creation, but sometimes creation can be based on destruction. Especially when a civilization that inhabits a planet brings to or is close to bringing to the destruction of that planet. If Nastia is correct, and that planet has a consciousness of its own, of course it will try to eliminate what tries to destroy it. It only makes sense.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of the classical notion of life force, right?
Elan vital.
Elan vital, vis viva, this like animating force of everything, which the ancients had essentially compartmentalized as the driver of material going into motion, something like that. Do you think of this in a similar way?
It sounds like you must, because you say that the Superforce predates everything else.
Everything. The Superforce has been there. I don't see that. I wish I could understand the concept of time. To me, time could be of many dimensions and could also speak to energy fields of some sort, but not as. I do not understand what time is.
We can unpack that a little bit.
Time travel? Do I think time travel is feasible? Absolutely. Do I think it's already been achieved? Yes.
Well, hold on. How can you think that time travel is feasible if you don't know what time is?
Very good point. So
I'm just like, even on a theoretical level.
I mean, I want to believe it's possible. I would love to go back and...
Maybe that's what speaks to many worlds' interpretation of quantum mechanics, this whole idea of parallel realities. Maybe it's not as if we going back into our own timeline, but somehow into the timeline of a parallel reality where you're a totally different person. But it still exists. Why? Because the superintelligence wants it to.
I think that's what it means to be human, though, is to try on all these alternate timelines, right? Like when I try to make a decision about what I'm going to do tomorrow, I'm trying on all of these different possibilities in my mind, and I'm going through them, and I can experience danger and so forth and not die with my imagination, and I can choose based on that, which seems like...
We will.
Yeah. I mean, I think time, unfortunately, is something that's sort of heartbreakingly simple. I mean, it's this measurement tool that humans have erected where you just compare some periodic predictable motion to some other motion, and you're able to clock it, the rate at which some change unfolds. And so, I would love to believe that there is something fundamental about it, but I think that it's just an invention. I think that it's a clocking invention. Time, is what clocks do, essentially, in all of these original equations from the venerable forefathers.
Wow. So I think
I'm
that
not sure of that.
if there is... I like this interpretation of time is what clocks do, but as you were talking, I was thinking that time travel would be possible if you could wind the entire universe back to the confirmation that it was in at a certain moment in time. right? So it means that
Except then you wouldn't exist anymore.
you would have to be able to step outside of it somehow. So you wind everything else back, and then you, in your current form, are subject to these new forces, to the same forces that shaped you at a different point in time. Does that make sense?
Well, it seems like the fundamental goal, too, with quantum gravity and everything is to be able to disconnect from the inertial system, like to be able to set yourself outside of the universe for a moment.
Well, that's what a black hole is, it sounds like, from Sal's perspective. The black hole is the place where you are not connected to anything. You've broken space-time, and so if you are inside of it, then you have...
Gone off the grid.
You've gone off the grid.
Gone off the grid. I like that. Oh, you've locally affected the matrix. That's interesting. Yeah. But there's something to the Superforce. This really must be looked into.
Are you...
And I wish we need we need a meeting of the minds, and not just us that think of ourselves as, not part of the mainstream. We are part of the mainstream community. We were educated by the mainstream community. We should not divorce ourselves from them. They are us, we are them. We just have to somehow convince them to look at these ideas.
Or just put them into action.
Humility, if need be.
Or just put them into action. I mean, I guarantee you, if you can create an anti-gravity drive, the mainstream will listen.
Yeah, so Michael Levin has this point. He's like, the thing that matters is what you can do with your ideas. And his ideas about the will and desire of cells sound really kooky until you realize that he's growing two-headed worms that perpetually make more...
He's going to get a Nobel Prize one day, though.
It's entirely possible, but the deeper level there is that if you have an idea and you can build something off of it, then you have incontrovertible proof about the functionality of your idea. And there's nobody that can argue about the foundation for how you came to that piece of technology. So I ask you, are you working on building stuff? You filed these patents. Patents are usually for things that you're building. What are you doing with it?
The only way I would do that is if the, how should I say, the government would give me my own lab, my own team, then yes. But I would not be on these podcasts anymore. So this gives you an idea that I'm not doing I'm just playing with theories. It's Sal at times not even going to sleep, just all these ideas, getting up, putting them in notebooks and stuff. If sometimes I just play with them in my head. I don't like writing stuff down anymore. I'm just...
Who's your community of people? Like who do you share ideas with? Who are you working on things with? Have you been embraced by the UAP community?
Absolutely no one right now.
I would think that the UAP community would be really interested in your ideas.
See, the thing is, they always want to go toward the experiment and trying to do certain things. And some of these ideas, if achieved experimentally, could prove dangerous to our national security. I choose not to do that. Do you understand? We have too many enemies in this world, especially in these dark and strange days we're living in today.
But then isn't it a big problem for you to even be publishing it and talking about it in the first place? Because once you have the equation...
Well, I'm talking about the Superforce, right? I'm not talking about the Pais effect.
Oh yeah, can you separate those out for us?
Well, in time, maybe the Pais effect could actually be used to nudge the Superforce, but until that time, it's eons, and I'm pretty sure I'll never see it. But I think it's possible to use the Pais effect to nudge the Superforce.
And is the Pais effect something you observed in your model system?
No, as a matter of fact, we were not able to see it in the high energy electromagnetic field generator, but that's because we were using a charge on the order of 10 to the minus 8 coulombs when you need an electrical charge on the order of 1 coulomb.
Why is that so difficult why was that not achievable?
It's not difficult. You could use a Van de Graaff generator, you could use a Pelletron generator. There are other ways, but again, the experiment would take a lot more money. I mean, we spent what about with with time, with the time of the people involved in the experiments, with the experiment, with the time in the chamber, with some of the product. We talk about $500,000 if over the course of 3 years. To get something, you need a real lab. You need maybe something on the order of 50 to 100 mil, and possibly up to 5 years with a team of people, with a team of physicists, engineers, technicians. I mean, heavy duty stuff.
So I guess if you disappear from the podcast space, we'll know what you're doing.
In the private, I don't want to do that in the private because of national security reasons. You have to understand the Pais effect. Even though right now it's considered a scam, it's considered pseudoscience, it's considered misinformation, disinformation. It's real, and it's extremely powerful. And if you just realize how powerful it can become, it's scary. No, I wouldn't dare to even start experiments on my own. What, in the garage? No, am I an idiot?
But aren't you worried that like some hostile foreign superpower might be willing to do that?
They don't have the right recipe on how to achieve it. I've never put all that on paper, nor will I ever. So
you're sitting on some secrets.
I would only do that for our own government if they were interested. But it seems they're not, which in itself raises questions. I'll just leave it at that.
So mysterious. Yeah, that's
maybe not that serious. Maybe all these things that you see flying around are somehow the how should I say, the experimental ramifications of the Pais effect.
Well, they are found mostly around military bases. That definitely proves interesting.
Mostly in North America and Europe.
Yeah. For some reason, the aliens love military bases, and they always have for whatever reason. Plus, I mean, geez, you look at some of these things. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen a stealth bomber or something fly by. I mean, these things basically look like aliens, and that was back in the 1980s. And I feel like you got to expect somebody's always out there with some crazy new invention flying around that we can't even imagine, that's like it's going to be introduced in 50 years,
Shiloh's dad has a story about when he was a child on the Ohio River. He woke up one morning and he went down to the water early, and he saw a guy in a UFO, in a flying saucer, fly by. And he ran to go tell his parents, and his parents were like, yeah. And he says that as the guy flew by, he waved to him. And he kind of
material of the craft.
There's like a human pilot piloting this flying saucer.
Yeah, the punchline is that it actually turned out to be an experimental aircraft.
That he later pieced together that was basically being done. There's some military base
back in the
Ohio.
50s, they were trying all these flying wing ideas, basically. I mean, it was just traditional propulsion. I think it probably had propellers in the back or inside, or it had some jets or something.
Something
based on the Quanda effect. The Quanda effect leads to those, but you need very high speed rotors. And anyway. Yeah.
So I guess my thing is, I'm like, why are you not part of the Jeremy Corbell, David Grush, Jacques Vallée world of UAP stuff?
I have no idea. Somebody did reach to me, and I choose not to. That most likely was private communication. I promised that individual that it will stay private, and so I will not name names. But someone did reach to me, and I thought I would meet some very important people and so forth. Nothing came of it. They even asked for the name and number of my supervisor at the time. I was close to PAX, but not quite here. Was working for the unmanned, but anyway. So yeah, it's very interesting. Very, very strange episode. They didn't call once; they called twice, and
I've heard a kind of similar story.
Very strange stuff. I'm not sure where all this is, and I'm not quite sure if it's. Yeah, let my thoughts be my thoughts.
Are you worried that your thoughts would like offend somebody at your work or something like that? I don't blame you. I'm just trying to understand.
Sometimes it's best not to voice your thoughts. Not only do they land you in trouble, but how should I say? I have an 11-year-old daughter to raise. So she is the primary focus of my life. All this stuff, sooner or later, it'll be proved correct. Yes, the bias effect will be proved correct. Yes, the Superforce concept will be proved correct. Will I live to see it? A lot of these people that have come up with these ideas have never lived to see their concepts being proved correct. So why should I be the lucky one? Does it matter? It's a question of legacy. Maybe my daughter, will live to see it. Maybe she'll be part of a program or so forth that will be dealing with some of the science, some of these ideas. And for her future and her future alone, I choose to keep my thoughts to myself. I hope you understand that.
So what are you doing now? You've written these papers. You've put this out in the world. Are you still working for the Office of Naval
surviving.
Research?
I'm just surviving. I just, day by day, doing stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with these advanced physics ideas. Absolutely nothing. But I choose not to say, I still have a certain degree of confidential work that I choose not to discuss. So,
hey,
and I said that in the beginning of the podcast that I will not discuss it.
You were saying that you were born in Romania in the 70s.
Yeah.
Did you speak Russian?
Actually, in the 60s.
In the 60s.
Late 60s. Yeah.
Do you speak Russian?
Oh, we were a little. We were between you and I, Nastya. It was something that was forced on us. So I chose, and now that I think of it, maybe I chose wrongly. I didn't like having to speak it because I was forced to do it. Again, this whole idea of math, physics, anything I was forced to do, I truly disliked. And one of the things, yes, they forced us from, I think, the grade of 4. I left when I was about like 7th grade. So from about 4th to 7th grade, we were forced to learn Russian. I mean, it's a beautiful language in its own way. It's, I have nothing against the people. I have nothing against the language, but I hate being forced to do things. Yeah, it's like endemic to my very essence. My instinct is to rebel. Maybe I have a rebel inside of me. It's just that because of certain things, I choose not.
I'm just trying to place your accent because I have Romanian friends, and you're not carrying a Romanian accent. And I'm just trying to figure out the etymology.
Wow.
I've heard I've heard that from my Polish friends too, who grew up in the Soviet.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Right? They just hated the Russians, so they kind of took pride in failing Russian class. Like it was a matter of pride almost.
I think Ollie's like that.
Mm-hmm.
But don't say you hate the Russians. Don't say you hate the people. You got to understand all these ideas are brought forth by tyrannical governments. By the people have nothing to do with. The people are just like you and I. Don't hate the people.
You're right.
Hate the power hungry, greedy. I'm not gonna,
Don't hate the player, hate the game.
I was brought up in New York City, so I can weave a tapestry of obscenities second to none. But I choose not to.
Where'd you grow up in New York?
Queens, New York.
We're in Queens. Jackson Heights.
Oh, that's right.
I think we talked about this. Yeah.
Like Northern Boulevard and 91st Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like five streets away from the 7 train. I used to hop on the 7 train, go to Times Square. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so were we. I remember this.
I love New York. I mean, I hear horror stories about it now from my friends. But yeah, I grew up. I grew up really in an Italian, Puerto Rican, Colombian community. It's like I think I was the only Romanian, so it's like it was very. It really was the melting pot. There's something beautiful about the city. There's something really beautiful about the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps. It's true. It never does sleep. I mean, I could hop on that train at freaking 2:00 in the morning, and the nightlife is unbelievable. So yeah, I remember New York City with I loved it. Put it that way. Some people put it down and so forth, and supposedly what it has become is not worth mentioning. But still, it's New York, man. You know, it truly is beautiful. Everything that's different has a beauty of its own. So why not appreciate it rather than try to put it down?
Yeah,
About
it's
the
a
good-
weird dichotomy because you see there's so much pain too, but there's also just so much progress, and it's like, it's this weird, you have to sort of hold both experiences in your mind at all times when you live in New York, because there's so much failure, but so much success, and it's just this, absolute furnace of motion, and everybody's...
There's some really good-hearted people in New York City. People that will listen to you. Once you get past the stone cold front that supposedly every New Yorker is like in your face saying nasty stuff, and once you get past that, they really are kind people. So it's still there.
I have
All
fun
these
with this.
overseers, all these archons, they can do whatever they will, and they will. But the deep down nature, the essence of the average human being is beautiful.
Yeah.
And should never, ever be based on destruction. It's all about creation.
Yeah.
That's the physics that we should study, the physics of creation. That's the physics of the super consciousness, the superintelligence.
I love the idea of bringing values back into science, actually, and the idea of valuing things that are not destructive.
That's why you should bring philosophy back into physics. Every physicist should go through at least an understanding of philosophy, and not necessarily by reading different just again, the acceptance of new ideas is a sort of philosophy. It's a philosophy of understanding,
Yeah, absolutely.
of acceptance.
Yeah, at least the free
Start
market
at the very
competition of
basics.
ideas.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
All right, do you have any is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to mention before we let you go?
I think we talked about a lot of things. If you guys ever want me back on, I'm yours. Let me know, and we can discuss different things. I'm pretty sure that from a technical perspective, though, I'd rather not go in detail on the Pais effect. So please be understanding of that. It truly can represent a national security risk. So I choose not to.
Yeah,
Put
fair
it this
enough. I
way,
mean,
when that experiment was carried out, even at 10 to the minus 8 coulombs, come on, that's a minute charge compared to the 1 coulomb I was trying to realize. We're talking about, 8 orders of magnitude? But anyway, there were 2 anomalies that were seen by the technician that was in the lab. Those anomalies are there in the report. Have your people look into it. Have your subscribers look into that report and see what those anomalies were.
What's the report that you're referencing?
The high energy electromagnetic field generator.
Mm.
It was performed at the Naval Air Station at Pax River in one of the chambers there, we call it the spin chamber number 4. But anyway, there should be an unclassified report that's out there for everyone to get, for everyone to see.
All right, we'll take a look.
yeah, we'll check it out.
Look at those 2 anomalies, and you'll find something interesting.
I mean, I really appreciate you saying that you'll come back, because that's those are how we get into some of the really good conversations, is once we've talked to somebody a few times and we've had a chance to go out into the world and talk to other people about these ideas and sort of retrieve other ways of interrogating.
Please come back with challenges to these ideas. This is how we learn.
Yes. Thank you.
I don't consider it an affront at all. As a matter of fact, this is how I learn. This is an educate. But again, unless these people read these papers, I mean, why? It's a 3-page paper, for goodness sake. At least put it for a review rather than reject it within hours. Why? Is it that bad? You read it, Shiloh. You read it, Nastya. Is it that bad? Is it written so badly that
No, it's a good paper. It's fast. It's easy.
I appreciate that it's
straightforward.
short.
Yeah,
Definitely. I mean, no, I don't think there's.
and the math is so simple?
I don't think that
Compared
it's
to
rejected
what's out there.
for. I think that it's probably in large part, like you said, a political, institutional level thing. I mean, I do, like I said, I voiced my own concerns with the universalization, but I think that as a logical argument that there's no real problems with it, other than the assumptions that go into the conclusions. But I think that, you know, in some sense, publishing in something that's going to get a lot of readership, like publishing in Science or Nature, is it's largely a political endeavor. You need to be able to tie your work into the people who are at the top of the pyramid. Like, there's just this whole way of doing it, and there's this format in which it's done that, you know, makes me take those journals with a grain of salt, that those are essentially written by people who can master those social hierarchies as much as they can do good science. You know, it's not just the best science. It's the best science that was able to be brought to the table by the people who are the best networked and really good at participating in their communities.
Yeah. I sometimes wish I had the friends in the right places, put that way. But
There's still
it is
time.
what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that, you know, all I care about is that one day somebody will look at this paper, somehow find it and say, damn, this dude was right. You know, if some vibration of me of a past Salvatore is still out there, oh, it'll get a tingle. It'll get a tingling sensation. But anyway, yeah, it's a different, maybe that's for a different podcast. All right.
Yeah, we'll have to save it for next time. I really appreciate you taking the time to come by and to let us unpack all of this and to just be so willing to dive into the details.
The pleasure is all mine. And please come with questions. Come back with questions. If they don't hinge or, you know, again, I'll try to keep them superficial and not go into the numbers, because I'm pretty sure as long as I don't go into the numbers, it's not affecting anyone. Numbers matter.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Orders of magnitude matter. Anyway,
Definitely.
there's a big difference between 10 to the minus 8 coulomb and 1 coulomb, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you for this was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you,
you.
Sal.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
I love the studio, by the way. Bye.